Your life as every rank in the Genovese crime family. All right, let's go. The vinyl booth at the back of Patsy's on 118th Street sticks to the back of your knees in the July heat, and across the table, a man named Vito Genovese is folding a paper napkin into quarters without once looking down at his hands. You are nobody yet. That's the first thing to understand about this life. You start as nobody, and nobody is a job description. It's August 1956, and the room you're standing in is a back office above a tailor shop on Mulberry Street. 3 sewing machines running so the sound carries through the floorboards and covers conversation. The routine is simple. You collect slips, you collect cash, you hand both upward. You ask no questions about where either one goes next. What isn't routine this particular Tuesday is that the man who usually counts the envelope, a soldier named Tony Bender, doesn't show. Nobody says his name again that week. The sewing machines keep running. What you observe, standing against the wall with a shoebox of betting slips under your arm, is a caporegime named Michael Miranda checking his watch 3 times in 10 minutes, then sending a boy downstairs to buy cigarettes nobody smokes. Frank Costello's name comes up once, in passing, the way you'd mention whether. He's still boss on paper. Everyone in the room knows that. And everyone in the room also knows Vito Genovese has been telling people otherwise for 2 years. You don't count the men who file through that office in a single afternoon. You count the silences between them, and there are more silences than men. The official record, years later, will describe this period as a contested but orderly transition in family leadership, the kind of phrase a Senate subcommittee writes when it means something it can't prove. The men who were actually in those rooms describe something colder, a leadership that simply stopped being asked questions, the way a phone stops ringing. The transition was resolved, the record states, through internal family consensus following the incapacitation of the previous administration. What the record leaves out is who decided incapacitation was the word they wanted. But the consensus didn't happen in a vote. And yet, every man in that tailor shop walked out that day already calling Vito Genovese boss, before anything had been announced, before anything had been signed, before anything had been said out loud that a stenographer could ever transcribe. And somewhere in that gap between the paper and the room is the entire shape of how this family actually moved. You're a soldier now, made, and the night it happens isn't a night you get to choose. It's the spring of 1957, an apartment in the Bronx with the shades taped shut, and a single bear bulb hanging over a table where a knife and a gun sit next to a holy card, with a saint's face half burned at the edges. The routine, if you can call it that, is the same for every man who walks into that room. You've heard whispers of it your whole life, and none of them prepared you. What isn't routine is that the man running the ceremony tonight is Vito Genovese himself, which doesn't happen for soldiers like you. Not usually. Not unless someone wants the room to remember exactly whose family this is. You watch his hand close around yours over the burning card, his voice low and even, the kind of even that takes effort. There's a caporegime named Anthony Strallo standing just behind his shoulder, arms folded, watching you the way a man watches a door he isn't sure will hold. The card burns down to your fingers before you let it drop, and nobody in that room reacts to the smell of your own skin scorching, because reacting is the one thing you are not allowed to do. The official version, when federal investigators reconstruct ceremonies like this decades later from informant testimony, describes it in clinical procedural language, an induction rite involving a burning saint's image and a blood oath of loyalty superseding family ties. What the men who lived through it describe instead is the specific silence afterward, the half-minute where nobody speaks because nobody needs to, because the thing that just happened doesn't require commentary. The ceremony is recorded nowhere. There is no ledger, no signature, no document that will ever say your name was added that night. The record leaves out the fact that, by every internal standard the family uses, you are now more bound to the men in that room than to your own blood, and there is no government form for that. You don't get to walk back through that door the same person. It's a Tuesday in October 1957, and the daily rhythm of being a soldier in this family is mostly waiting in a candy store on Thompson Street for a phone that rings twice and disconnects, waiting in a parked Buick outside a funeral home that has nothing to do with you, waiting for an envelope that will pass through 4 hands before it reaches the one it's meant for. The routine is boredom dressed up as discipline. What isn't routine, this particular week, is the number of funeral homes in 2 neighborhoods that suddenly can't take new arrangements until the following month. You don't ask why. You notice it the way you notice anything in this life, sideways, without comment, filed away. A man named Albert Anastasia, not Genovese family, but everyone in every family knows the name, gets a shave in a hotel barbershop on a Friday morning and doesn't get up from the chair. You hear about it from a bartender before you hear it from anyone who'd actually know, which tells you something about how fast this kind of news travels even when nobody wants it to. What you're told officially, through the only channels a soldier like you has ever told anything, is that it was a personal matter, unrelated to family business, the kind of phrase used precisely because it explains nothing. What men say in the back of that candy store, in voices pitched just under the radio, is a different story, about commissions and territory, and a man named Carlo Gambino who benefits more than anyone else from an empty barbershop chair. The record will eventually call it an unsolved homicide, the case formally remaining open, investigative leads exhausted without resulting prosecution. What the record leaves out is that nobody who mattered was ever really looking. But the case stays open on paper forever. And yet every man who was working that week knew exactly which families gained and which families lost before the chair was even cleaned, and that knowing, unrecorded, unprosecutable, passed mouth to mouth across a city, outlives every file the government ever closes. This is the part where you stop being able to say, you didn't know what this life costs. You're a caporegime now, which means the room gets smaller and the stakes get larger at the same time. It's November 14th, 1957, and the place is a fieldstone house in Apalachin, New York, that belongs to a man named Joseph Barbara, 60-some cars lining a country road that was never built for 60-some cars. The routine is supposed to be simple. Men gather, men eat, men talk business under the cover of a barbecue, men leave by morning. What isn't routine is a state trooper named Edgar Croswell, who has been suspicious of this house for 2 years and finally decides this is the day he sets up a roadblock at the bottom of the driveway. You watch it happen from a window upstairs, men in $200 suits going out the back door into a cornfield, ditching jewelry in the grass, running through brush in shoes that were never meant for running. A man you recognize, Vito Genovese, walks out the front like nothing's wrong, like walking is a different thing entirely from running, and gets stopped at the bottom of the drive with everyone else. 58 men get questioned that morning. 18 others vanish into the woods and are never caught at all. The official record states that the gathering constituted evidence of a national criminal conspiracy, whose existence had previously been denied at the highest levels of federal law enforcement, which is institutional language for the fact that J. Edgar Hoover had spent years insisting this entire thing you're standing inside of didn't exist. What the men trudging back out of that cornfield said to each other, brushing mud off $200 trousers, was that the meeting itself had barely started, that nothing had even been decided yet. No one at Apalachin is charged with anything that holds. The convictions that follow, conspiracy to obstruct justice, get overturned on appeal within 3 years, the appellate court finding insufficient evidence that any conspiracy existed at all. What the record leaves out is that the meeting's actual purpose, what was supposed to be decided that day, is never established by any court, in any filing, anywhere. But the case collapses on appeal, and yet the country now believes in something it spent decades insisting was a myth, and that belief, born in a cornfield outside a small town nobody had heard of, does more lasting damage to this life than any conviction ever could have. It's a brief pause here because you should know something before you go further. You are not watching this. You are inside it, and from this point forward, the choices in this script are choices you are the one making. That's the deal you made walking in. It's June 1959, and you've made captain, which in this family means territory, which means a Friday night in a social club on Sullivan Street where the routine is cards, espresso, and a radio playing low in the corner that nobody actually listens to. What isn't routine tonight is the chair across from you, which usually holds an associate who owes money on a loan you fronted, and which tonight holds a man you don't know, sent by someone else, asking a question dressed up as a favor. He wants a name. Not yours, someone you run, someone whose debt has gone past the point where patience is a virtue. You watch his hands while he talks, the way they stay flat on the table, deliberately still, the stillness of a man trying to look like he isn't choosing your answer for you. A caporegime 2 tables over, a man everyone calls Funzy, glances up once, just once, and that single glance is the entire weight of the family's expectation landing on your shoulders without a word spoken. What you say in that room is never written anywhere. There's no ledger for a sentence like the one you're about to give. The official record, if this debt ever surfaces in a future indictment, will describe it as a matter resolved internally, consistent with established collection practices. 6 words covering an hour you will remember for the rest of your life. You give the name. The record will never know what it cost you to say it, because the record only counts outcomes, never the second before them. And yet that second, the one where you chose the family's math over a man you'd shared a table with a dozen times, is the actual hinge this entire life turns on, the place where every promotion after this one gets built on top of a door you closed and can't reopen. You don't get a version of this story where you didn't answer. It's May 2nd, 1957, before the funeral homes ran out of dates, before Apalachin, and you're standing in the marble lobby of 115 Central Park West at 10 at night, watching a man in the elevator car turn his head just as the doors begin to close. The routine for Frank Costello, even then, even at the edge of everything, is the same lobby, the same hour, the same doorman nodding him through. What isn't routine is a heavyset man crossing that lobby behind him, calling out, "This is for you, Frank," and firing once before the elevator doors fully shut. You are that man. You are Vincent Gigante, 280 pounds of him, and the bullet grazes Costello's scalp instead of finding the center of his skull, because the angle is wrong, because the doors were already moving, because of a half-second neither of you control. You're out the door and into a car before the echo stops. Costello, blood running into his collar, looks at the doorman and says it was nobody, that he didn't see who did it. And the doorman, who saw your face clearly enough to describe your suit to police 20 minutes later, will somehow fail to identify you in a lineup 4 months from now. The official record states that the victim was unable to positively identify his assailant, leading to dismissal of charges against Vincent Gigante for lack of corroborating testimony. What every man in this family understood, the moment that elevator door reopened with Costello still breathing, was that Costello had just announced his own retirement without saying a single word about it. Costello steps back from the family within the year. He never runs anything again. The case against you closes, officially, on the grounds of insufficient witness cooperation. But the bullet missed, and yet that single inch of bad aim does more to end Frank Costello's career than a direct hit ever could have, because a man who survives a message like that and walks away anyway sends a message of his own, and the entire family hears it before the blood is even cleaned off the marble. You did that, not watched it, not heard about it secondhand in a candy store 3 weeks later. You pulled the trigger in that lobby, you missed by an inch, and you carried that inch around with you for the rest of your life, because in this family, failing to kill a man cleanly is sometimes the smartest thing you'll ever do. It's 1969 now, and you're a caporegime watching a man you once stood behind in a lobby start dressing differently. The routine, for years, has been the same: sharp suits, a barbershop on Sullivan Street, a reputation as the smartest earner anyone's seen in a generation. What isn't routine, starting this particular winter, is the bathrobe. You watch him shuffle down Sullivan Street at 6 in the morning, unshaven, muttering to himself, stopping at a fire hydrant to talk to it for a full minute before moving on. A psychiatrist's report, commissioned later for a competency hearing, will describe him in clinical terms: chronic schizophrenia, disorientation, and inability to assist in his own defense. The men who actually run his crews, who take orders passed through his brother, a priest named Father Louis, describe something else entirely behind closed doors. A boss who runs an entire family from inside that performance, who has not missed a single decision of consequence in 15 years, who simply understood, before anyone else did, that the federal government cannot indict a man it has already declared incompetent to stand trial. The official record, across 7 competency hearings spanning 2 decades, repeatedly finds Vincent Gigante unfit to participate in his own prosecution. What the record leaves out, because no doctor will ever certify it, no transcript will ever capture it, is the specific Tuesday morning his own psychiatrist privately tells a colleague that the man in front of him is, without question, performing. It works for 30 years. Charges get filed and refiled and shelved. A man wanders a Greenwich Village street in a bathrobe long enough that an entire generation of federal prosecutors retire without ever putting him on a witness stand. But the doctors keep their findings, year after year, filed and stamped and entered into evidence. And yet the only people who never once doubted his sanity were the men taking orders from him, every single day, in a voice nobody outside that family ever got to hear. And somewhere in that gap between 7 medical findings and 1 whispered word passed down a chain of captains is 30 years of a federal investigation walking in circles around a man standing perfectly still. You're underboss now, and the table you sit at has narrowed to almost nothing. You and the man across from you, and very little else in the room worth mentioning. It's late 1985, a back room above a restaurant on Madison Avenue, the kind of room with no windows because windows are a liability nobody discusses out loud. The routine, for the better part of a decade, has been simple. A front man named Anthony Salerno sits at the head of the table for every meeting that matters, because everyone in this family knows the actual decisions get made elsewhere, by a man performing illness on a sidewalk 40 blocks downtown. What isn't routine tonight is the FBI surveillance photographs sitting face down on the table between you, which someone on the inside confirmed exist before you ever walked through this door. The man across from you wants to know how deep the wiretaps go. You don't have a clean answer. You watch his fingers drum once against the table, twice, then stop entirely, and in that stillness is the entire question of whether you're still useful to this family or whether you've just become a liability sitting in a chair. The official record, when the commission case is finally tried in 1986, will describe the family's leadership structure as evidence of a continuing criminal enterprise operating under a hierarchical command structure with identifiable decision-makers. What the record leaves out, because it was built to convict Anthony Salerno as boss, is that the man it convicted was never actually the one giving the orders that mattered. Salerno goes to prison and dies there in 1992, convicted as a boss he was never fully in command of being. The record closes the case on him. But the conviction stands, the sentence is served, the file is marked closed. And yet the actual chain of command behind every order Salerno is convicted for runs straight through a man in a bathrobe the federal government had already certified, in writing, as incapable of running anything at all. And that single contradiction, sitting quietly inside a closed federal case, is larger than the 40 years the law ever managed to make stick. You're the one across the table now. There's no rank above this one that matters to you anymore, only the decision in front of you, and you are the only person in the room who gets to make it. It's 1990 and Vincent Gigante is formally identified, for the first time on paper, as boss of the Genovese family, not by his own admission, never that, but by a federal indictment that finally states outright what every man under him has known for 2 decades. The routine, right up until this moment, has been distance, orders passed through brothers, through priests, through captains who never once needed to hear his actual voice to know what he wanted done. What isn't routine this particular spring is that the distance has finally failed. The paper has caught up to the man. You watch him in the only place he can still be watched without consequence. A sidewalk outside a building on Sullivan Street, robe open at the collar, talking to no one in a voice loud enough for the surveillance van across the street to record every word. A federal prosecutor, years later, will admit under cross-examination that even after the indictment, even after the conviction in 1997, doubt about the legitimacy of the performance never fully left the courtroom. The jury convicts him anyway. He pleads guilty, eventually in 2003, to obstruction of justice, to faking the very illness that kept him free for 3 decades, and dies in a federal prison hospital bed in 2005. The official record states that Vincent Gigante was convicted of racketeering and conspiracy, with a subsequent guilty plea confirming a long-standing pattern of feigned mental incompetence undertaken to obstruct judicial proceedings. What the record leaves out, what no plea agreement will ever capture, is the specific weight of choosing, at the very end, to admit the performance rather than die still wearing it. The case closes with his death. The family, by every official account, is named in indictment after indictment as diminished, fractured, no longer the singular force it once was. But the file is marked closed, and the obituaries call it the end of an era. And yet the choice you're holding right now, admit the act or die inside it, is the same choice every man in this family has carried since the night you burned a saint's card between your fingers. And the scale of that choice doesn't end with one man's death in one prison hospital. It's still sitting on the table in front of you. If you want more videos like this, subscribe.